Hey, and welcome to another episode of Cult Life with me, your host, Robin Jackson. South Africa goes to the polls in just under a month's time. Our first democratic election was held back in 1994. Following a series of tense negotiations and years of liberation struggle, the first democratic election was held in South Africa on the 27th of April. That was, of course, in 1994. Well, this election changed the history of South Africa. It paved the way towards a new democratic dispensation and a new constitution for the country. For the first time, all races in the country were going to the polls to vote for a government of their choice. 19 political parties participated and 22 million people voted. It was unprecedented in the history of South Africa. Well, this election took place in a very festive atmosphere, and contrary to fears of political violence and a civil war that was, the country was teetering on the brink of a civil war. The African National Congress, the ANC, won the election with 62.65% of the vote. The National Party received 20.39%. The Inkatha Freedom Party, the IFP, 10.54% of the vote. The Freedom Front, 2.2% of the vote. And the Democratic Party, 1.7% of the vote. The Pan-Africanist Congress, the PAC, got 1.2%. And the African Christian Democratic Party got 0.5%. Now, although the ANC gained a majority vote, they formed the government of national unity, headed by the ANC's Nelson Mandela, who became the first black president of the country. I did not vote in that first democratic election because I was a Jehovah's Witness back then. Now, I remember going to my place of employment the next day, and everyone proudly displaying the mark on their thumbnails, confirming that they had voted. Well, I spent the subsequent days explaining to colleagues and associates why I did not vote. Well, this was all from the Watchtower's standpoint, of course. However, the requirement not to vote has varied over time within the Watchtower. Although few witnesses vote, since 1999 it is technically a conscience matter. The latest Elders Manual does not even mention voting at all. It has ranged from a conscience matter in 1999, in the 1999 Watchtower, and I quote from that Watchtower. It says, "In view of the scriptural principles outlined above, in many lands, Jehovah's Witnesses make a personal decision not to vote in political elections, and their freedom to make that decision is supported by the law of the land. What though, if the law requires citizens to vote? In such a case, each witness is responsible to make a conscientious, Bible-based decision about how to handle the situation. If someone decides to go to the polling booth, that is his decision. What he does in the polling booth is between him and his Creator." In 1991, it was not allowed according to this quote. Pay attention to yourselves and to all the flock. It was in page 139 and 140. It says, "Jehovah's Witnesses maintain neutrality with regards to the political and military affairs of the nations. They do not interfere with what others do as to voting in political elections, campaigning for political offices, joining non-neutral organizations, and shouting political slogans and so forth. Since true dedicated Christians are no part of the world, if a member of the congregation unrepentantly pursues a course in violation of his Christian neutrality, he thereby disassociates himself from the neutral Christian congregation. Elders should talk to one known to be contemplating such a course, since he may be doing so in ignorance. If he disregards the help offered and pursues a course in violation of Christian neutrality, a committee should send the facts substantiating the disassociation to the branch office on the S77 and the S79 forms. So you can actually see the flip-flopping of the stance on political neutrality from the witnesses once again. Well, witnesses view all governments as evil. They understand them as necessary in our present world, but believe governments are all under the devil's control. Though they appreciate the freedoms afforded to them in many of the world's democracies, and though they are swift to take advantage of legal means to protect and advance their causes, they have faith that all governments will collectively be dismantled by God in the near future. However, witnesses view many of the world's problems as intractable issues that can only be repaired by divine power, and they don't believe that any politicians, irrespective of their sincerity or intentions, can make any headway regarding climate change, overpopulation, pollution, or any other pressing problems like the plight of the poor, housing, and so forth. Additionally, Jehovah's Witnesses are against abortion, without exceptions. They're against gender equality, no matter what they may say, and LGBTQ rights. Well, I found interesting research. The Pew Research Center did some research with regard to Jehovah's Witnesses and their political views in America, in the United States of America, in 2014. Now, and I'll quote from what it actually says there. It says, like many other high religious Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses tend to take conservative positions on social issues. For example, 3/4, which is about 75%, say abortion should be illegal in all or most cases, while similar shares oppose same-sex marriage and say homosexuality should be discouraged by society. Roughly 3/4 of Jehovah's Witnesses also reject evolution, saying humans have always existed in their present form since the beginning of time. But Jehovah's Witnesses do not commonly advocate for these beliefs in the political sphere. The denomination teaches that its members should remain politically neutral and abstain from voting or participating in any action to change governments. This is reflected in our polling. 3/4 of Jehovah's Witnesses say they are political independents who do not lean toward either a majority party. Half decline to answer a question about political ideology, that is, whether they describe their political views as conservative, moderate, or liberal. And most Jehovah's Witnesses, 64%, when asked if they are registered to vote, say they are not registered or decline to answer the question. Well, the laws on neutrality advocated by the Watchtower have often created a mess and have caused some of their followers to lose their lives. This can be seen by, of course, the tragedy that occurred when the Malawian witnesses were hypocritically forced to uphold a higher standard than was expected of those in Mexico, or by the governing body themselves. Now, Raymond Franz, in Crisis of Conscience, actually in chapter 6, who was a member of the governing body, outlined the double standards that was employed by the leadership with regards to how the Watchtower doctrinal principle that led to the torture and death of thousands of Malawian witnesses was excused for those in Mexico. Malawian witnesses suffered unspeakable atrocities due to following the Watchtower's illogical policy forbidding them to hold a political card in a one-party state. During the same period, witnesses in Mexico were permitted to bribe officials for a cartilla card in order to escape military service. So, Watchtower's policy on political involvement is based on poor scriptural reasoning, and as a result has been contradictory and illogical and very inaccurate, to say the least. This has resulted in ongoing changes and led to standards being applied differently in countries, as we have seen in Mexico and Malawi, and inconsistently between situations. Now, in more recent times, the Watchtower has eased up its stance against political involvement, and in doing so, shown their stand had very little scriptural backing in the past. Now, this comes from, I think, the JW Facts website, where it says, in 1991, the Watchtower Society joined the United Nations as an affiliate NGO for the claimed purpose of accessing their public library. In 1996, non-active military service became a conscience matter, and I spoke about the military service issue with regards to Jehovah's Witnesses in one of my earlier episodes. You can go back and check that out. In 1999, voting became a conscience matter, and the Watchtower Society continues to actively send delegates to influence political bodies globally. Now, of course, this renders the suffering and the death of many Jehovah's Witnesses on an individual basis as needless and pointless. The governing body carries the blood guilt of the Malawian witnesses. They led to unnecessary death over this poorly supported stance. Well, here in South Africa, after long, hard-fought freedoms to be able to vote in our democracy, the polls on the 8th of May, I will be making my mark in the elections for the government and the party that I think would serve the best interest of our nation. Too many people have sacrificed their lives for this privilege we now take so for granted in this country. That is all for this episode. Thank you for listening, and tune in again next week. Bye for now.